Fidel Castro, the iconic leader of Cuba, was no stranger to danger. Throughout his 50 years in charge, over 600 attempts were made on his life, yet remarkably, he survived them all. Which brings up the question, how did one man survive so many assassination attempts? It's 1959, and Fidel Castro has just completed the Cuban Revolution, overthrowing the government of Fulgencio Batista after a 6-year conflict. This soon gets the attention of the United States, who don't take kindly to having a communist government just 90 miles away. Political opposition was suppressed. Opponents of the new regime were arrested, jailed, or exiled. Civil liberties were restricted, industries nationalized, and private property and businesses seized by the state. One of the first attempts to remove Castro was a notorious Bay of Pigs invasion. Cuban exiles, backed by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, tried to overthrow his government. The goal was to install a pro-American government and put an end to the communist threat. But it didn't go according to plan. Far from it. The invasion force landed at the Bay of Pigs on April 17th. However, the Cuban military was aware of the plan and quickly overwhelmed the invaders. It was a humiliating defeat for the Kennedy administration, solidified Castro's power, and the CIA would not sleep until Castro was overthrown or worse. In the years following, the agency would come up with hundreds of assassination ideas, ranging from the sublime to the ridiculous. Shortly after the revolution, the CIA came up with the idea of poisoning Castro's favorite cigars. They would contaminate them with a botulinum toxin that would kill anyone that placed it in his mouth. CIA records showed that the box was delivered to an unidentified person, but there was no record whether an attempt was made to pass the poisoned box onto Castro himself. Poisoning Castro's cigars didn't work, so the CIA instead decided to send him explosive cigars. There's no real evidence of such a plot, although the slapstick nature of the plot could have been used to deflect from other, more sinister methods. Castro was an avid skin diver, so not surprisingly, the CIA looked to exploit this hobby. After the Bay of Pigs debacle, the US government was in the process of negotiating the release of captured prisoners with the Cuban government. They decided it would be a great idea to present Fidel Castro with a diving suit. But this would be no ordinary suit. Its insides contained a fungus that would cause a chronic skin disease, and tuberculosis was placed in the breathing apparatus. The suit, however, never left the laboratory. The chief of the anti-Castro CIA task force asked his assistant to determine whether an exotic seashell could be rigged to explode and placed in an area where Castro frequently dived. The plan was to take an unusually spectacular seashell that would be sure to catch his eye. It would be detonated once lifted. The scheme was soon found to be impractical, however. None of the shells in the waters around Cuba were found to be spectacular enough or heavy enough to support the amount of explosives required. Upon seizing power, Castro closed the lucrative casinos that had been run by various mafia crime families. Not surprisingly, the mafia jumped at the chance to help the CIA to get rid of Castro and get back to happier times. Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante, both members of the FBI's top 10 most wanted list at the time, were recruited, along with Johnny Rosselli. According to CIA files, it was Giancana that suggested using poisoned pills to kill the Cuban leader. After several unsuccessful attempts, a further plot to poison Castro while visiting his favorite restaurant also failed, when he stopped visiting it. In 1975, the Church Committee hearings stated that between 1960 and 1965, the CIA attempted 8 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro. The retired chief of Cuba's counterintelligence service estimated the number of total attempts to be 638, spread over the administrations of 8 US presidents. The last documented attempt on Castro's life occurred in 2000, which involved placing 90 kilograms of explosives under a podium in Panama, where he was due to give a speech. However, his security team discovered the explosives before he arrived. Castro himself later said, If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, I would win the gold medal.